Ladies and gentlemen, elves and dwarves, goblins and fairy princesses, welcome one and all to iWizard, the best in sci-fi and fantasy review. Today we're going to take out our crystal ball and prophesy the future. We're going to take a look at the books on my TBR for the rest of the year. I'll talk about the books, why I picked them, and all that jazz. I'll see you after the intro. Alright folks, Jordan here. So given that this is a new BookTube show, I thought I'd let you in on my plans for this channel by giving you a bit of a look at my TBR for the coming months. That way, together we can get pumped up about these books and maybe, just maybe, you'll join me on my quest to read them all over the coming months. Okay, let's start with August. What am I reading in August? We're going to start with Shards of Honor by Lois McMaster-Bujold. This is the next book I'm going to review. I'm already about halfway through. It is hard sci-fi interplanetary romance. You can see there the first cloth edition, the later Bane edition, and I have the newest Bane edition. This is a pretty hardcore sci-fi cover. Love that. So I won't spoil anything about this one because I'm about to post my review of it tomorrow, actually. It's the first in a very long series, something like 21 books. Several of them have won Hugo Awards for Best Novel of the Year. Others in the series have been nominated for Hugo Awards. This was back when the Hugo Awards really meant something. So that is pretty good. We'll review that tomorrow. Book 2 on my August TBR is It by Stephen King. I have somewhat of a complicated relationship with Stephen King, and let me explain why. I had always been told, kind of growing up, that Stephen King was this lowbrow writer, just kind of mass market horror, cheap thrills, cheap scares, that sort of thing. I had never really picked him up because of all the things I had heard about his writing. And so when I was getting interested in literature and I decided to major in philosophy and then later to get a degree in literature, I always just thought of him as a kind of dime store horror novelist, second-rate horror novelist. I think I'd read a short story by him, but that was pretty much it. Then, when I was in graduate school, I read King's memoir on writing, and I loved it. It's one of the best books I've ever read on the subject of writing well, writing fiction in particular, and he structures it like a memoir, so he actually tells you what good writing should look like, and then he actually writes a memoir, and the writing is really spectacular. It's a beautifully written book, and so I love that book, and I said, wow, okay, the man is an excellent writer. I can't deny this. I've read his memoir. This is really good writing. At least he can be a good writer when he gets outside of his genre. So eventually I came to teach this AP course. I'm a teacher now with my AP seniors, and I decided to make them read on writing over the summer, and they loved the book too. So I said, okay, why don't I try reading one of King's books? So I said, I'm not going to buy one, but I'll go to the library and see what they have. So I'm browsing the shelves, and I come to this hulking book. I love beefy tomes. It's a really huge book, Under the Dome, and I loved the cover. The cover is this little town, and there's a dome over it, and I said, wow, this is a really interesting idea. This is the best of what, fantasy and sci-fi and horror can do. I really like this concept. And so I read the back of the book and I said, okay, let's give this one a try. Then I read it and I initially liked it, probably for like the first 150 pages. I was getting really into it. I was liking the setup. Then it started to get really ridiculous. Some of the things that were happening in the book were such that I felt I couldn't suspend my disbelief. The characters were these caricatures. Stephen King, I feel like, sometimes writes these caricatured bad guys. These really sort of stock bad guys. that I just really don't believe in. And the book just kind of felt juvenile to me. So I stepped away from King, and over the years I shared this experience with friends, and they said, no, Under the Dome is not one of King's better books. You have to read it or The Stand or Salem's Lot or Pet Sematary. So I'm like, all right, I'll give Stephen King one more try. And I did. I read It. This was a couple of years ago. And I've got to tell you, it was a lot better than Under the Dome. I could really see why people do like Stephen King. It was very psychological. You really get to know the characters. You follow a pretty large cast of characters. And there were parts, again, that I quite liked. I just couldn't fully get into it for some reason. And I think all of this is my way of trying to say that it's been several years since I DNF'd it, and I think I wasn't ready for it at the time, and I want to try it again. Now that I'm booktubing, I think I'm going to make a video called A King Skeptic Reads It, and we'll see if we can get some traction with that video. It will be like me trying to read it and trying to go into it with a positive attitude. Let me tell you, I want to like Stephen King's books. I so do. He writes about suburbia and small towns. I love the genre of horror. I love Stranger Things, which is got a very Stephen King-like feel. But it just hasn't happened for me yet with King, with the exception of On Writing. So we'll see how that goes. I'm actually going to try to tackle it this August. All right, I need to speed things up. If I'm going to get through these, you guys don't want to watch a 5-hour video, or do you? So I have to stop telling stories and just get to the list. Next up in August, The Butlerian Jihad by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. I've heard mixed things about the Dune books that Brian Herbert and that's Frank Herbert's son and Kevin J. Anderson wrote, but I love Dune so much that I just feel like I need more of it in my life. The Butlerian Jihad is the first book in the Legends of Dune prequel trilogy, which takes place over 10,000 years before the events in Frank Herbert's Dune. The series tells of the crusade by the last free humans in the universe against the thinking machines, a violent and dominating force led by the sentient computer Omnius. Okay, so next up is On Writing by Stephen King. I already talked about that, but that should be a fun one because I'm hoping to make a video that kind of crystallizes and synthesizes King's best writing advice. He gives some great advice in this book, and so I'm really excited to tell you what I love about this book. And it's why I'm never really hoping to give up on King, because I know he can be a good writer, and I know he can write in a way that I find very satisfying. All right, next up in August will be Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I teach this book. I love this book. I think it's a really important book, especially right now. It's a dystopia, of course, in which the firefighters don't put out fires. They start fires to burn books. Free thought has been outlawed. And this one guy, Montag, the main character, who is a fireman himself, he decides to rise up and rebel against the system. I love the people of the book at the end. It's kind of like an underground cult of people who want to preserve the great books, like Shakespeare and Homer and things like that. So maybe I will start calling my listeners the people of the book. How would that be? All right. Next, we have an old forgotten work, and that is Plague of Angels by Sherry Tepper. My wife is actually going to review this for you all. She's probably going to do one review per month on this channel moving forward. She loves fantasy and sci-fi as much as I do, but she's a busy lady. She's actually a scientist and a full-time lecturer at a university, so she's got a tight schedule, and I think she's going to review this at the end of August. Anyhow, here is the description on this one. West of the land called Artemisia, past mountains, valleys, arroyos, and mesas, atop a sinuous canyon climbing road, the place of power spreads claw-like at the edge of the chasm. Here are walls to hold out the dragons, ogres, and goblins of the ruined lands. And from here, the witch Quince Illel peers out into a world of faded pageantry, archetypal villages, and gang-filled cities decimated by violence and plague. The scattered remnants of humanity recount legends of the time when most of mankind went to seek a better world. They know that they were left behind, only to face the encroachment of the netherfolk and the terrible, enigmatic creatures called walkers. Yet not even the witch knows the stunning truth behind the myth and prophecy that fuel her terrible ambition, and she's determined to capture those who will unlock these deepest secrets. I'm going to stop here because the book description actually goes on and on and on. But again, one of the things I want to do with this channel is I want to review forgotten classics. This is a very well-reviewed book. People who love fantasy and sci-fi literature, this is kind of a hybrid of both of those genres. They speak very well of this book. If you go on forums on the internet, if you go to Goodreads, if you go to Amazon, people are just filled with praise for this book. It is such an underrated classic, and my wife actually read it and she loved it, and so she wants to review that for you. Okay, so we're up to September. Keep in mind, this is a tentative list that I'm going over right now. These are the books that I'm going to review on this channel from August through December. It's not exhaustive. I may review more if time permits. And keep in mind, too, that these books don't include the lists and the discussions and the other things I have planned. Actually, I also think at some point over the course of August through December, I also want to read and review Legend by David Gemmell, but I didn't put that on my list because I'm not sure if I'll have time for it, but I might. Okay, so September is actually going to begin with, wait for it, Dune, books 1 through 3 by Frank Herbert. We got this here. All right. I love Dune. It's so amazing. I actually teach this book at school, so I get to read it every year. So I'm very excited to give you an expert review of Dune. I won't say any more about Dune because if I do, I'll end up geeking out all night. But the reason I wanted to review Dune in September is because the second film version of Dune by Denis Villeneuve is coming out in late October. So I figured if I reviewed that for you in the beginning of September, you'd be able to geek out with me, and then maybe I'll do something about the new movie when it comes out. Heck, maybe I'll even review David Lynch's very odd and disjointed, strange version of Dune from the 80s. It might be fun to do a little mystery science theater with that movie because it is a blast. It is a poorly made blast. Okay, so next up on the list is Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. I've always wanted to read this book. I saw the movie, the 2002 film version by Steven Soderbergh, the one starring George Clooney. I liked it. It was pretty good, and so I've always wanted to read the book. Stanislaw Lem is I believe he's a Polish writer. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. But he's really a master of the sci-fi genre, so look out for my review of Solaris. Apparently this book, well, I've seen the movie, so I kind of know, I do know the plot. It's very psychological. Solaris is part of that move. I don't think technically Stanislaw Lem is part of the new wave of science fiction, but he does represent that turn in the sort of mid to late 20th century of turning inward, exploring inner space versus exploring outer space. So this is kind of like a Freudian psychodrama in space, and I'm really excited to review that with you. And so the next book we are going to do on our list is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Yeah, I don't have that one with me, so you can see the cover there. Lord of the Flies is another book that I teach every year. This is the classic story of British schoolboys whose plane crashes and strands them all on this tiny tropical island in the middle of the ocean, also in the middle of some kind of nuclear apocalypse, some sort of war, World War III sort of thing. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It's a brilliant allegory. The writing is superb. And why don't we move on? Last on my TBR for September is The Stress of Her Regard by the excellent writer Tim Powers. This book will be reviewed by my wife. This will be her monthly review for September, Dr. Nikki Hill. I heard about this book from the sci-fi writer Christopher Rocchio. The book is apparently one of those secret history stories that follows the lives, in this case, of the famous English romantic writers, the young romantics like Lord Byron and Percy Shelley. It's basically the lives of the romantic poets, except that there are vampires involved. There's a race of Protean vampires who run some kind of cult and alter history in really interesting ways. So that is really cool. Apparently, Powers tries to make it historically plausible too. So he'll go through the journals of Byron and the Shelleys and Keats or whatever, and he actually tries to figure out where they were going at that time, where they were, what they were doing, and he tries to stay accurate to the source material. So if Byron is in France on whatever this particular date in the 19th century, Tim Powers is going to make sure that he doesn't deviate from that. So he's actually trying to write a kind of interesting alternate history. So I'm excited for that. That's a kind of a vampire novel. So anything with romantic poetry and vampires in it, I am in. So we'll see that review will come out at the end of September. Right. Now, October. We are up to October. October is, wait for it, Horror Month. At iWizard, Halloween, yes, lasts all the way through October. That's how it should be. And so it's going to be Horror Month. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop rambling and just show you the books we'll be reading. I won't have time to tell you about each one of them. And of course, I'm trying to build a community here, so I hope that as we go along, we can do some read-alongs this fall. That would be a lot of fun. In October, we are starting with Salem's Lot by Stephen King. That, I suppose, will be contingent on how reading it goes, right? If it is terrible, maybe we won't do Salem's Lot. If I hate King's It, maybe we just won't move on to any other King. But I just have this sneaking suspicion that I'm going to like King this time. I really want to. Next, I will be reviewing the stories of H.P. Lovecraft. Got the complete anthology here, the commemorative, well, it's not the complete, it's the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft, okay? So I love H.P. Lovecraft's horror tales, and this is the Necronomicon commemorative edition. So I'm excited I'm not sure how I'll do this. I might review a couple of stories out of this book. I may try to read as much as I can of this book and review kind of the whole thing as an actual book. I may do separate reviews of isolated stories. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this yet, but just know that in October, H.P. Lovecraft is coming. Next up is Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. I saw the 1956 film version probably 5 years ago. It's about an alien invasion where these plant spores fall from space and grow into these large seed pods. If you've ever heard the pod people, if you've ever heard that expression, that comes from this. And these large seed pods can produce basically identical copies of existing human beings with the same memories, personality, physical appearance, all of that. So that should be really exciting. Apparently the book kind of reads like, one of those books where you're suspicious of other people, and a little bit like John W. Campbell's Who Goes There, which was eventually made into the movie The Thing. I believe that was John Carpenter, right? Okay, so book 4 in October will be Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. This is another example of a film I've seen without ever even realizing it was a book. Ira Levin is an excellent writer. And then to cap off the month, I am going to do an episode on what I think are the best short horror stories. I'll be doing that with the lovely Dr. Nikki. We're probably going to make a list of the 13. Yes, that's right. The horrible number 13. I was thinking of doing 66, but that might be too many. 666. That might be too many short horror stories. So we're going to do what we think are the top 13 short horror stories of all time. We picked up this American Supernatural Tales. This is the series is edited by Guillermo del Toro, the director, and so we're going to review short horror stories. I'm not huge on short stories necessarily, but I think that some of the best horror stories are short stories. And so I'm excited to do that with you. We're probably not going to review this book or anything, but I think some of the tales that we want to include on our list are actually in this book. Okay, and that brings us up to November. Time to speed this up. We're running out of time. November, here are the books I am planning to read. We have Down Below Station by the amazing C.J. Cherryh. Look at this book cover. That's amazing. This is book 1 in the Company Wars series. It's the Alliance Union universe. I've heard it's top-notch. It won the Hugo Award in 1982, might have even won a Locus Award. And after Down Below Station, we are going to dive into Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny. I have heard so many great things about this book from so many ardent, hardcore fantasy and sci-fi fans. Roger Zelazny is apparently the bee's knees, and so I am going to try to review. This is a beefy book. That's because books 1 through 10 of the Chronicles of Amber are in this. So I'll probably review the first and maybe the second book of Amber by Roger Zelazny, and that should be a good time. Next up, we have Leviathan Wakes, and that is going to be another review. That's going to be Dr. Nikki's review for the month of November. She is going to review this book 1 of the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, so that should be a good time as well. Then, moving along, we're going to do Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. Heinlein is one of my favorite sci-fi authors, actually one of my favorite novelists in general of all time. And at some point, we'll get to reviewing some of his other books. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land, Have Spacesuit Will Travel, The Cat Who Could Walk Through Walls. That's probably not what it's called. It's something like that. And there's just Time Enough for Love. There's all sorts of great material by Robert A. Heinlein. Just a real just sci-fi bard, one of the greats of all time, Robert A. Heinlein. And so we'll be doing Starship Troopers, which I've read before, and this book is very different from the movie. So if you saw the Goofy movie with Casper Van Dien and what's her face? What the heck is her name? Oh, she's very beautiful. What is her name? I forget her name. She's very pretty, but the book is very, very different. And lastly, for the month of November, we are going to read Speech Sounds by Octavia Butler. This is a long, short story about an apocalypse that takes away people's ability to speak. Actually, some people can speak, but the pandemic that has spread throughout America and throughout the world kind of messes with people's ability to wield language. So some people can speak, others can't speak, but they can read. Other people can't read or speak, but they can listen to and understand what other people are saying. It's a language virus. So this is one of those brilliant stories by Octavia Butler, where not only do you have a sort of scary post-apocalypse scenario, but you also have one in which it's super chaotic and scary because no one can talk to each other. People can't plan things out. People can't get together and rebuild civilization. So it definitely borders on horror there. One of my favorite short stories. Okay, we finally made it to December, and we are going to kick December off with the greatest fantasy novel of all time, and that, of course, is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, books 1 through 3. Okay, so we've got The Fellowship of the Ring, we have got The Two Towers, okay, and we've got The Return of the King. This is another book that I teach every year in a fantasy and sci-fi course that I teach at school, and so I'm excited to share my expert wisdom and review those books for you. We will probably do The Hobbit as well. Maybe even I'll do an episode on the Silmarillion. Definitely excited to do that with you. And to cap off the month, and this was a request by a viewer named Coffee Troll, we are going to do Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen R. Donaldson. This is the first book of the first trilogy of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, yes. And so I have read none of this series, and I hear it's a masterwork. So folks, this is how I'm going to cap off the month of December. I know this is a crappy edition. I will probably just bang through this, and if I like it, I will probably buy a nicer edition and put it up there on my brand new bookshelf. So folks, I am out of time. Please join me on this reading adventure. Join me on my quest. With your participation, we can do read-alongs, and we can make iWizard a real community for fantasy and sci-fi. As always, please subscribe by hitting the button below, and feel free to connect with me on Patreon, Facebook, Goodreads, and that sort of thing. So thank you for listening, and ta-ta for now.